Hi, classmates. It's Good Friday, and I hope everybody has fun Easter plans for the weekend. Let's get our work done so we can focus on being with our families, huh? I chose to do my articles for the week three, underachievement, perfectionism, overexcitabilities week. The first article that I chose is probably the hardest one. I had to put it down, pick it up quite a few times. It was an article about the underachievement. It's called The Message Matters, and it's about the role of implicit beliefs about giftedness and failure experiences in academic self handicapping. Uh, these authors did a very in depth research experiment where they took a, a pretty good sized group. It was over 100, like freshman level students at an elite university, like top 10 in America. So some of them, it was like 75% of them were in the past been labeled gifted, but you really couldn't have gotten into the university if you weren't highly intelligent. Um, and what they did was just try to experiment on internal messages. So the groups were split, and half of them got a message about their giftedness being, let me look up the specific words because they're close, an entity view message. The message included things about saying that your intelligence can be genetic, and that you have fairly stable performance, and you should just perform consistently, and basically that it's fixed. Okay. And then the other incremental message had to do with the fact that, we can tell that you're um, very intelligent. You received high marks on your, preliminary scores to get into this experiment. And, and basically that, with effort that they can do well and do better. Then that they gave those two groups into two more groups, and half of those were given a test, a series of like problems that were they were going to fail them. There was no way to solve them. And then half of them were given problems that were high level, but the probability that these students would solve them were good. And then they observed. Then they were given a second set of tests, and they were given an experimental out, like with this light. They were told that, in studying, if the lights are brighter, then they do better, and if they're lower, and you can put the light wherever you want, but we do need all levels of lights to be experimented on. So the whole point was a concept called self-handicapping. And what the researchers theorized was that the students who were given a message that their intelligence was incremental, that you could improve upon it, that it could be better, and then given a test where they succeeded, and then given a second test that they were not going to make excuses for why they succeeded or didn't pass some of the things. But the students who were told that their intelligence is fixed, and then they were given the test where they failed, in the instance that they were given the test and they were allowed to choose dim lights, than they gave themselves an out. They self-handicapped in a way so that when they fail, that they would have an excuse for it, to cover up for their first failure. And the most interesting part of this article was the fact that the females tended to self-handicap more. And I thought that that was pretty interesting because I'm doing my research paper on girls and gifted, and I think that I'll actually use this as a source. The second one I wanted to talk about was perfectionism. I chose the article that was actually written in Macedonia, or published in Macedonia, and it had to do with socioeconomic status. And the authors theorized that students that had a higher socioeconomic status that were gifted versus lower socioeconomic status that were gifted, that the higher level, the higher SES level students would exhibit the maladaptive form of perfectionism. And as it turned out, they do. And they then theorized about why they would. And so the conclusion is that the parents put an unfair amount of pressure on the kids. The kids were almost were like a part of the family. They had to represent the family. That failure was, not acceptable, and so then those students exhibited perfectionism in a neurotic or an unhealthy way, and they often related it back to the pressure and the anxiety that they felt from not disappointing their families. The overexcitabilities article, I chose it because it said meta-analysis, and so I believe that these guys would just look at everything else for me and then report back to me what it said, and this is very true. They did, however, only look at articles that are qualitative and that used these particular types of scales that have been written to identify overexcitabilities, and in the process determined that the scales were basically faulty and maybe not as valid as they should be for giving so much credit to overexcitabilities and gifted students. So in the end, the authors openly say that there is some phenomenon with overexcitabilities and gifted, but they cannot determine through their meta-analysis of all this research that's been done based on these surveys and this qualitative information that gifted students have any more or higher overexcitabilities than the normal population. Their suggestion is that the instruments in which that are used are improved upon. That was the OEQ2 that was used basically as like a default mechanism for determining overexcitabilities in gifted, and they just felt like there was enough evidence that tool was faulty. The last one I really wanted to talk about is personality, family, social, and school factors, why gifted students drop out of high school. And so I think out of everything that I've probably read this entire semester for this class, that this article has hit me the most. And so these authors elicited, they openly admit that it was very hard to find people that had dropped out, gifted students that had dropped out of high school that wanted to be included in their research. And so they had about, it was 9 or 12, but these are all now adults that some, like one person had dropped out like 2 years before, but they even had some, and then somebody that had dropped out 14 or 15 years before. So it was a survey, but it was almost the phenomenological type, because what they did was they tried to, in my opinion, siphon out the essence of why gifted students drop out of high school. And the conclusions were, in my opinion, tragic, because most of the reasons were that they felt teachers didn't care about them and did not give them challenging work. And the environment in school for these students was toxic. They were isolated, they were alone, they didn't get support from their administration. One person reported that their administration actually told them to drop out and leave high school. They said that there would be like one teacher or two teachers or a counselor and a teacher that they felt would listen to them and care. But another very interesting thing that the authors determined was that due to their high level of sensitivity and their ability to think and feel deeply, that many of these students had felt great loss, and did not have the help that they needed to cope with it. And then school just compounded those negative feelings. Almost all of them admitted to turning to drugs, even though most of them said that they eventually stopped. I guess that I guess that some of the things that we can look at doing to improve dropouts is probably the benefit of this article.